going to discuss the 5 different timing techniques in classical conditioning. The first one we call simultaneous conditioning. This is where your conditioned stimulus and your unconditioned stimulus are presented at the exact same time, hence simultaneous conditioning. In Pavlov's example, this would be that when the food was presented, the bell or tone, however you want to call it, was presented at the exact same time. So there was no time interval in between or no lapse in between presentation of the US and the CS. So simultaneous conditioning is when both the US and the CS is presented at the same time. The second type is called trace conditioning. This is where the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus are separated by some time interval where neither stimulus is present. So in Pavlov's example, the conditioned stimulus being the tone or the bell and the food being the unconditioned stimulus are separated by a time interval where neither the food nor the bell are present at all. Since the conditioned stimulus being the bell is no longer physically present when the food being the unconditioned stimulus occurs, the subject being the dogs had to rely on their trace memory to remember how to respond. The third type is the strongest and most rapid form of conditioning. We call this short delay conditioning. This is where the conditioned stimulus begins a second or so before the US. So in Pavlov's example, we would present the tone just briefly right before a second or so before the food was presented. So it would go bell food, bell food. That's how the pairing would take place. We call that short delay conditioning. The next is called long delay conditioning. This is where the onset of the conditioned stimulus precedes that of the unconditioned stimulus by at least several seconds, but the conditioned stimulus continues until the unconditioned stimulus is presented. So in Pavlov's example, we would take the CS, which is the bell, and of course it would come before the US, and it would happen, we would ring the bell a few seconds before the food is presented, and we would continue ringing the bell until and throughout when the US is presented. So it would go ring, 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 bell, and it continues until that US being food is presented. The last one we also consider it to be the lowest form and weakest type of conditioning. This is where the conditioned stimulus gets presented after the unconditioned stimulus. In Pavlov's example, we would present the CS being the bell before the food. So the conditioned stimulus being the bell, we would present, we would present it after the food. So conditioned stimulus, it would go food being presented and then the bell. So food being presented and then the bell. So the conditioned stimulus occurs after the unconditioned stimulus, which is food in Pavlov's famous example.